While preparing dinner for my husband's entire family, I caught my father-in-law saying, "She's probably doing this for a green card." I set down a tray, looked at him and said, "I was born in New York, but let's talk about that fake tax ID you used." He froze. "My name is Leona, and I was born in Astoria, Queens, 2 blocks away from a laundromat that hasn't changed its neon sign since 1987, and across the street from a bakery that still makes the best almond croissants in the borough." My childhood was noisy, cluttered, and filled with the kind of love that didn't always say the right things, but showed up in all the small, quiet ways that mattered. I'm a senior librarian now, working at a public library in Flushing. It's not glamorous. I don't get stopped on the street or thanked in articles, but people know me. They know I'll find the book they remember reading when they were 12. They know I'll listen to stories they don't always know how to finish. It's a job filled with ghosts and whispers and the kind of silence that speaks volumes. And maybe I like that. When I met Julian, I wasn't looking for a love story. I just turned 34 and had gone on enough bad dates to know the difference between someone who liked the idea of you and someone who really saw you. Julian saw me. Or at least, I thought he did. We met at an engagement party on a rooftop in Long Island City. He was talking to someone about Thelonious Monk, and I overheard just enough to ask if he actually listened to jazz or was just trying to sound interesting. He laughed, not offended, just amused. "I've got a stack of vinyl that would like to argue with you," he said. That night, we talked until the DJ packed up. I remember how easily we fit into conversation, like sliding into a familiar booth in a favorite diner. He was charming in a way that felt practiced, but not dishonest. I'd later learned that charm runs deep in his family, it's a currency. His world was clean lines and polite smiles, old family money tucked behind thick oak doors, and manicured hedges in Stamford, Connecticut. His mother, Eloise, was poised and polite, always with a handkerchief tucked into her sleeve and a correction ready for anyone's grammar. His father, Dorian, ran a commercial real estate business that everyone seemed to respect but no one really questioned. Julian and I dated for 3 years. They were good years, mostly. Comfortable. I was used to working late and coming home to a warm apartment where jazz played softly from the speaker and dinner was already halfway done. He listened when I ranted about patrons who tore pages from books or asked me to print conspiracy theories. I listened when he vented about project delays and impossible clients. When he proposed, he did it quietly, no flash mob, no helicopter ride. Just us on a walk in Prospect Park under a tree that had dropped half its leaves already. He said, "I know life with me isn't always simple, but I want it to be ours." And I believed him. Our wedding was small, mostly his family and my closest friends. My brother, Clarence, couldn't make it, he's in San Diego, and his wife was due any day. My parents passed when I was 26, car accident on the Long Island Expressway. So it was mostly his world I was stepping into. I didn't realize how different it was until later. Their dinners had rules, linen napkins, topics you didn't bring up, compliments that felt like performance reviews. His mother once said, "You hold your fork like you learned from a book," and smiled like she meant it as praise. Julian told me they needed time. That they were just traditional. That it would get better. So I tried. God, did I try. Our first Thanksgiving after getting married, I insisted on hosting. I wanted to show them something real. Our apartment in Forest Hills wasn't huge, but it was ours. I cleaned every surface, borrowed folding chairs, even made place cards. I cooked all day, turkey brined for 24 hours, stuffing with sourdough and caramelized onions, cranberry sauce from scratch, mashed potatoes whipped with roasted garlic, and green beans sautéed with almonds and lemon zest. Julian's family started arriving around 4. His sisters, Cecily and Bronwyn, brought their husbands and their kids. Eloise brought a flower arrangement so tall it blocked half the table. Dorian arrived last, with a bottle of wine he didn't open. Julian poured drinks. I finished plating the appetizers, stuffed mushrooms, deviled eggs with paprika, and little puff pastries filled with goat cheese and figure. I was setting the tray on the coffee table in the living room when I heard it. Dorian's voice. "She's probably doing all this for a green card." It wasn't loud, but the room was quiet enough that it carried. He said it like it was a joke, but the kind of joke people use to test how far they can push their truth. Someone, maybe Bronwyn, murmured, "Dad," but he kept going. "She doesn't talk like us." It's always a bit performative, don't you think? My fingers tightened around the tray. My brain stalled. I was born in New York. I went to public school. I had student loans. I could name every stop on the F train between 179th and Rockefeller Center. I'd spent my whole life here. And yet here I was, in my own home, being spoken about like a foreigner. I walked into the room, the tray in my hands, and set it down on the coffee table without saying a word. Then I looked at Dorian. Not with anger. Just clarity. I was born in New York, I said quietly. But let's talk about that fake tax ID you used back in 1998. You know, for that contract in Yonkers. The silence was instant and deep. Dorian went pale. Like all the color drained from his face. Eloise gasped, and Bronwyn stopped mid-sip of her wine. Even the kids seemed to sense something had gone wrong. Julian walked in a second later, carrying 2 more wine glasses. What's going on? No one answered. Dorian tried to laugh, a weak little chuckle that didn't make it past his throat. I mean, that was a long time ago, he said. Hardly relevant now. I turned fully to him, calm. Is that what you tell the IRS? Eloise placed a hand on his arm, as if trying to will him into silence. Cecily looked at the floor. Julian asked again, more sharply, Leona, what's this about? I looked at him. I've known about it for a while. A friend of mine works in city archives. We talk. I got curious one day, wondered how your dad managed to get a permit for a site that had already been flagged. Turns out, a fake LLC with a forged tax ID number can do wonders. Dorian started to speak, but I cut him off. Don't worry. I haven't told anyone. But I thought you should know, since you're wondering what kind of person I am. The tension in the room was thick and brittle. Julian was quiet. Everyone was quiet. I turned to him again. I love you. But this? This is not okay. If your family thinks I married you for immigration benefits, then we have a bigger problem. He nodded slowly. I didn't know he thought that. Maybe you didn't want to, I said. No one ate the appetizers. We went through the motions, dinner, dessert, but it felt like a performance. Smiles that didn't reach eyes, laughter that came too fast or too late. Julian helped me clear the table in silence. That night, we slept apart. The next morning, Dorian called. His version of an apology was, I didn't mean anything by it, and you have to understand how I was raised. I told him I understood perfectly. That I also knew how to dig deeper. That this time, I kept his secret. But I might not always. Julian and I went to therapy a few weeks later. He said he felt caught in the middle. I told him there is no middle between love and contempt. You either believe in the person you married, or you believe the worst about them. He said he believed in me. I told him he had to prove it. We're still working on that. The weeks that followed were uncomfortable in a way I didn't have a word for. It was like living in a house where someone had removed the insulation. Everything was a little colder, sounds traveled further, and no matter how many times you adjusted the thermostat, it never felt warm again. Julian was trying. He really was. He offered to cut off contact with his parents, or at least take some distance. But I didn't want ultimatums. I didn't want a man who would disown his family for me. I wanted one who would stand up to them for me. There's a difference. One afternoon, I came home to find him in the living room with a giant binder open on his lap. It was filled with documents, family business records, old contracts, letters. He looked up and said, I want to understand what you know. What I didn't want to see before. And for the first time, I saw a shift in him, not just guilt or regret, but a quiet kind of accountability. We talked. For hours. About his dad, about his childhood, about how he was raised to protect the family's image above everything else. That family first didn't mean love, it meant silence. It meant turning away from things that made you uncomfortable. It meant keeping secrets and swallowing truth like broken glass. He told me about the first time he realized something wasn't right, when he was 16 and his father paid off a zoning official to ignore violations at a waterfront development site. He said nothing then because no one told him he could. No one modeled what integrity looked like. You were supposed to just play the game. I told him I wasn't angry at him for his father's sins, but I would be if he carried them forward by pretending they didn't exist. Therapy helped. It wasn't magical. It was slow, awkward, sometimes even painful. Our therapist, Anita, was a blunt woman in her 60s who didn't let Julian off the hook with polished language or pretty intentions. You're not responsible for your father's behavior, she said, but you're responsible for how you respond to it now. We kept seeing her weekly. Meanwhile, his family stayed away. No phone calls, no invitations, no check-ins. The silence from that side of the world was loud and deliberate. Julian's mother sent a card in the mail in early December. It was a Christmas card, a photo of the whole family, excluding us, standing in front of a lit tree with matching sweaters. Inside, in looping cursive, she wrote, "We miss you both and hope time softens misunderstandings." No apology. Just a soft, passive evasion. I didn't respond. Neither did Julian. Around New Year's, Julian started taking long walks by himself in the evening. He said he needed to think. I didn't ask what about. I was still holding space for my own thoughts, trying to sort through the tangle of what this all meant, not just about his family, but about our future. One night, he came home after one of those walks and sat next to me on the couch. The TV was on, some rerun I wasn't really watching. "I want to sell the condo in Stamford," he said quietly. I looked at him. "You're serious?" He nodded. "I don't want to hold on to things that tie me to who I used to be." The man who turned his head. Who didn't ask questions. The condo had been in his name since his late 20s. A gift from his father when he joined the family firm. We never lived there, but he used to visit it occasionally, sometimes to work, sometimes just to get away. He used to talk about keeping it for later. "I think you should do it," I said after a moment. "If it's what you really want." He smiled faintly, but there was something heavier in it. "I need to." The listing went up within 2 weeks. We started having different conversations after that. Bigger ones. About how we want to raise future kids, if we have them. About what we want our home to feel like. Not just physically, but emotionally. About which cycles we were willing to break and which traditions we'd have to leave behind. I also started talking to Clarence more. My brother and I had been close once, but distance and life had gotten in the way. I told him about Thanksgiving, every detail. He listened without interrupting, then said, "Damn, sis." That took guts. We talked for an hour. Then the next night, another hour. It became a thing, us checking in again, rebuilding something that had slipped through the cracks. Julian noticed. "You seem lighter when you get off the phone with him," he said one evening. "I think I am," I replied. It wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about remembering who I was before it did. We were invited to another family event in March, Eloise's birthday dinner at a French restaurant in Darien. The email invitation was coldly formal. Julian stared at it for a long time. "You don't have to go," I said. "I know," he replied. "But maybe I should." "Why?" He looked at me with something between sadness and resolve. "Because I need to be in that room and not flinch. I need to say what I should have said months ago. I didn't say yes or no. I just said, then I'll be sitting next to you." He smiled. But I could tell the smile was weighed down by something old and inherited. When the day came, I wore a navy blue wrap dress. Subtle. Elegant. Julian wore a gray blazer and didn't touch the wine list. The restaurant was candlelit and hushed, all linen tablecloths and waiters who moved like shadows. Eloise kissed us both on the cheek like nothing had happened. Dorian barely made eye contact. Dinner passed in shallow conversation, Cecily's new house renovations, Bronwyn's daughter getting into boarding school. Then, over dessert, Dorian made a joke about getting creative with finances in your 30s. Julian put his fork down. "I think we should talk about what happened," he said, steady. The table fell silent. Eloise sipped her espresso. "Julian, this is hardly the time." "It is," he said. "Because if we don't, we'll keep pretending." "And I'm done with pretending." Dorian leaned back. "What more is there to say?" Julian looked straight at him. "You said something ugly and untrue about my wife. You disrespected her in our home. And instead of apologizing, you tried to minimize it." No one moved. Julian continued, "I grew up thinking we don't talk about uncomfortable things. That silence keeps the peace. But all it does is rot what's underneath." Eloise's lips thinned. Bronwyn looked away. I reached for Julian's hand under the table. He squeezed it once. "I'm not asking for a performance," he said. "I'm asking for accountability." Dorian didn't speak. And the silence that followed wasn't just uncomfortable, it was revealing. The silence at the table stretched long enough for the candle between us to flicker low. In that moment, the weight of everything that had been buried under polite dinners and strained smiles finally rose to the surface. You could feel it pressing against the walls of the restaurant, invisible but undeniable. Dorian shifted in his seat, as if physically uncomfortable under the scrutiny. He wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not by his son, and definitely not in front of others. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I may have said something I shouldn't have. It was, in poor taste." Julian didn't flinch. "It was racist, Dad." Dorian's jaw tightened, the old mask of composure cracking for just a second. "You don't understand what I meant." Julian leaned in, voice still calm. "No, I understand exactly what you meant. And so does everyone else at this table." Cecily shifted uncomfortably, brushing an invisible crumb from her lap. Bronwyn kept her eyes on the tablecloth, her fingers fidgeting with her dessert spoon. Eloise's expression was blank, like a statue that had weathered too many storms to react anymore. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I was there, and I was listening, and I was watching them sit in the stew of their own discomfort. For once, I didn't feel like the outsider. They did. Julian continued, his voice low but steady. "This isn't about making a scene. It's about making sure we don't keep pretending that we're something we're not. You don't have to like Leona. You don't even have to understand her. But you will treat her with respect. Or we won't come back here again. The message was simple. No shouting. No theatrics. Just a boundary laid down with the weight of every unspoken thing finally finding shape. Dorian opened his mouth again, but whatever rebuttal he had died before it reached his lips. For a man so used to power, being confronted like this, by his own son, left him stripped bare in a way I don't think he expected. Eloise spoke next, her voice thin but controlled. Well, I think we've all had a long day. Perhaps it's best we move on. Julian nodded. That's your choice. But we won't be moving on until there's actual acknowledgement of what happened. The rest of dinner passed in a kind of cold civility, the air thick with tension, but no further words exchanged on the matter. We didn't linger. We left just after coffee was served, our coats thrown on hastily and hands held tightly as we stepped back out into the cold March evening. Back in the car, Julian was quiet. He stared ahead, his jaw set, but his shoulders relaxed in a way they hadn't been when we arrived. You okay? I asked gently. I am now, he said. Then, after a pause, it's weird. I always thought confronting him would blow things up. But it just ended a lie I didn't want to live in anymore. I reached across the console and took his hand. In the days that followed, there was no fallout. No angry emails. No sudden phone calls. Just a continued silence from his parents, which now felt less like a punishment and more like a choice we had all agreed to without signing papers. We turned our focus inward. Julian began volunteering on weekends, something he said he always wanted to do but never had time for. He picked a community development center in Queens that worked with underprivileged teens, helping them navigate college applications and job prep. He came home after his first Saturday there with a kind of energy I hadn't seen in months. I helped a kid write his first resume, he said, smiling. He'd never seen one before. I didn't realize how much I took for granted. His face, lit up and unguarded, reminded me why I'd fallen for him in the first place. I returned to the library with a new project in mind. A local oral history series. Interviews with longtime Queens residents, capturing their stories before they disappeared under the churn of gentrification and rent hikes. I pitched it to the board and got a small grant to get started. We had purpose again. Not distraction, purpose. We hosted smaller gatherings with friends who felt more like family than the people who shared blood with Julian. We started a Sunday dinner tradition, just us and maybe a couple of friends, where the food didn't need to impress anyone and the conversations were honest. Every so often, we'd hear about his family through the grapevine. Cecily's husband was up for partner at his firm. Bronwyn's daughter had started horseback lessons. Eloise was organizing a fundraiser for a local ballet school. None of it pulled at us anymore. But not everything faded quietly. In late April, Julian received a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I was wrong. I don't know how to say I'm sorry the right way, but I hope this is a start. Dorian. No flourish. No excuses. Just those words. Julian read it 3 times. Then handed it to me. What do you think? He asked. I folded the paper and set it on the kitchen counter. I think it's a start. But it doesn't mean we forget. He nodded. We didn't write back. Not yet. Because forgiveness isn't a switch. It's a process. And some bridges, even if you rebuild them, don't lead you to the same place they used to. Over the summer, things continued to shift. Julian and I took a short trip to Woodstock, nothing fancy, just a cabin rental, a couple of paperbacks, and long walks without cell service. It was the first time in a long while that everything felt still. No noise from his family. No awkward dinners. Just us, figuring out how to be honest in a world that often rewards the opposite. We talked a lot that weekend about how people change or don't. About cycles and silence. About what it means to build a life that isn't shaped by other people's expectations. When we got back, we made a decision. We started the process of setting up a nonprofit organization under Julian's name. But not the kind his father would recognize. This one was rooted in transparency and accountability. The mission was simple: offer legal and educational support to workers in construction and real estate who were often exploited or underpaid. Immigrant laborers, day workers, young guys trying to make ends meet who didn't have the resources to stand up to shady developers. It was slow at first. Julian tapped into some contacts who were uneasy about what he was doing. His name opened doors, but also raised eyebrows. We weren't subtle about our mission. In fact, the opening page of the nonprofit's website included a firm statement: we believe no business should thrive at the expense of human dignity or honest labor. We launched the nonprofit under Julian's full name, Julian D. Ainsworth Foundation for Fair Labor Practices. Dorian saw it. Of course he did. A month later, we were forwarded an email from a mutual acquaintance. It was from Dorian, trying to discredit the organization, saying it was idealistic, uninformed, a passion project without teeth. Julian didn't even flinch. Let him talk, he said. Every time he does, it just proves the point. And then, something remarkable happened. A local journalist, someone I'd met once through a library event, reached out to me. She had been looking into corruption in construction permits and development deals in Westchester and Queens. She asked if I'd be willing to talk. I didn't give her names, but I gave her a story. She did the rest. The exposé dropped in October. It was thorough, well-sourced, and damning. It named multiple developers and outlined years of shady backdoor dealings, forged tax documents, and regulatory violations. One of the names included was a shell company that had been tied to a development site in Yonkers through a forged tax ID and a fake LLC. The timeline and details were all public record now. Dorian wasn't named directly, but anyone in the business knew. There was fallout. Investigations were opened. Permits were re-examined. Partners backed away. Investors asked questions. It wasn't a downfall, it was a quiet unraveling. A slow, methodical stripping of the image he'd built for decades. He couldn't retaliate. Not without drawing attention to himself. We didn't hear from him after that. But Julian got a message from Cecily one day. Just a text. I don't agree with how he treated you. But I can't go against him. You understand, right? He didn't respond. We hosted Thanksgiving that year again. Not for Julian's family, just ours. My brother flew in from San Diego with his wife and baby. A couple of friends came by. We cooked, laughed, passed dishes around until the table was more plates than wood. At one point, Clarence pulled me aside. You ever think about how full circle this is? He asked. Last year, you were putting out appetizers while that man tried to make you feel small. I smiled. And now he's choking on his own legacy. Clarence raised his glass. To poetic justice. As the night wound down and everyone settled into that post-dinner lull, Julian sat next to me on the couch. You think they'll ever try to make peace? He asked quietly. I don't know, I said. But that's not our burden anymore. We didn't win by yelling louder. We won by building something better. And sometimes, that's the most satisfying revenge of all.